everyone, this is John Scroggins with the Baton Exchange. You know that every person, including you, actively or passively contributes to the culture and their surrounding community. You know, as emerging leaders and influencers, you will be the culture shapers of tomorrow. What kind of culture is your contribution creating or reinforcing? You know, it really matters. John Stonestreet, president of Colson Center for Christian Worldview, has shared with me some key ideas on culture that you might consider as you seek to make a difference.
You know, I think cultures either bring life or they bring death. You know, Proverbs talks about this, that there's a way to life and there's a way to death. And that's personally true. If I make bad personal decisions, I might be on a pathway to death, maybe physical death, maybe, you know, emotional death, the inability to have relationships, relational death. Or there's a path to life, Proverbs says. And by the way, that's absolutely true for cultures, right? There are cultures that create space for citizens to flourish. And there are cultures that suppress it. So for example, a culture that is a life-giving culture, a humanizing culture, is one that recognizes natural absolutes, right? A quick way to death is to jump off a building and pretend like there's no gravity, right? A quick way to cultural death is to pretend like there are no consequences to actions. We have a definition of freedom, for example, in our culture that's just widely accepted, that freedom, we want people to be free. What we mean by that typically is morally free and sexually free, as if there's the freedom to do what we want and there won't be any consequences. We set up entire scientific and medical endeavors to remove the consequences of personal decisions. This is foolish. This is not a life-giving culture. This is, in the name of freedom, making people slaves to their passions. A culture that is going to be life-giving is a culture that's going to allow people to be all that they were created to be, allows them to experience their gifts and use their gifts in a context of freedom, where there's structure of the rule of law that allows us equal access to opportunity, but doesn't pretend like, you know, all efforts are equal or something like that. And this is a life-giving culture. We can see very clearly cultures that don't bring life. There are the cultures that say, yes, humans are dignified except for those, except because they're of that race, or maybe because they're not born yet, or maybe they're old and they're decrepit and so therefore they don't have the same rights to life as others. These are cultures. So we go to the Declaration of Independence that the United States is founded upon. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, if you look around, it's self-evident that we're not created equal. We're not created, you know, the same. You know, some of us are taller than others, and this skin color, that skin color, this gender, that gender. So if it's going to be self-evident that we're created equal, it's going to have to be because a culture recognizes that we're not equal on the outside, but we're equal on the inside. That there's something inherent and shared about our humanity that is valuable, that's priceless even. And it's that God-given capacity and freedom to live and to move and to make decisions and so on. And so that's, you know, there's a big difference between cultures that allow that and create space for that and create a context where people can live in that reality versus cultures, and we certainly can look through history and see cultures that actually shrivel up our humanity. I think another difference between a culture that brings life and a culture that brings death is a culture that doesn't confuse the means and the end. You know, what's life for? What's the meaning of life? Our culture, for example, thinks that the highest meaning is stuff. You know, Blaise Pascal famously said there's a God-shaped hole in all of our hearts that can only be filled by God. But you watch enough commercials and suddenly you start thinking, wait a minute, there's a Lexus-shaped hole in my heart that can only be filled by a Lexus, right? I mean, there's you know, that our hole is in our heart is stuff-sized, and it can only be filled by stuff. Like, give me more stuff. You know, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. I think our culture, it's I shop, therefore I am. You know, so we have a culture that the day after, you know, at least in the American context, we give thanks. As a nation, we then trample security guards for flat screen TVs. I mean, this is just an amazing dichotomy. And it's a culture that's saying that the end is stuff. No, no, no. Success is not the end. Success is a means so that we can actually live well before God and live well before neighbor. We can live for others and serving others. And so success is something that lifts everyone up, not just allows me to hoard. And that's a difference between a culture where the highest vision is to build the community and bring life to others, or it's just to hoard stuff, for my own pleasure, which then is fleeting and it's brief. And you could see where this kind of works itself back into education, right? Instead of education being about being a good citizen and even a good person, education today is being able to get a job so that you can make money, so that you can buy stuff, so that you can die with stuff, I guess, right? But education itself is knowing what's worth knowing, learning what's worth learning, living in a way that is true and good and beautiful, and knowing what's worth loving especially.